All right, well, good evening welcome back to New Testament Survey at City on a Hill. I am excited tonight to get into Colossians after the longest introduction ever to the book of Colossians last class, which took an entire class and never got into the actual text. So I'm hopeful that we'll cover at least one Bible verse tonight. No promises. But it is what it is. We'll give it our best shot. I'm just going to pull up here and make sure that I have a place here in case there are questions that come in so I can promptly ignore them. And Kelsey can say, hey, don't forget about the questions, to which I'll go, I did, and then I'll have it in front of me. Let's see here, let's do this. I also want to just say there is maybe somewhere in the world a self-respecting Baptist preacher, teacher of the Bible, who is appalled at the idea of there being saran wrap on the pulpit, if that's what this is. But there are no self-respecting Baptist preachers here. I was gifted some homemade treats from one of the Bible studies, and I didn't eat dinner tonight, and so I am just, you're going to have to bear with me. I'm mic'd. You're going to hear me chewing online. Sorry, not sorry. I may not take any bites. We'll see. But I have it here just in case with my tea as well. Good evening and welcome in. Glad to have you back in here. Session 29 notes are in the back. If you did not get one, then you can get one, although it is almost identical to session 28. There is one small change. There's one passage that I punted on in place of another passage, and I'll explain why I did that. We'll probably end up covering them both anyway, because that's just kind of who I am. But I do want to kind of lay the framework for what the next several weeks are going to look like for us. I am going to try to keep with the schedule of Awana from now on, because it is difficult for me to teach on nights where there is not Awanas, namely because my wife also serves in the youth, and it leaves nowhere for our kids to go, to which they're here already, more than 75% of their lives. And so it's nice for me to be able to tell them, hey, we'll only come when Awanas are going on. So that means that tonight, next week, and the week following, we will be in session, and we will make tremendous progress, I have no doubt. The following 3 weeks, we will not meet. So that will be the Wednesday, I think, of Christmas. I think Christmas is on a Wednesday this year, if I'm not mistaken. And then the following Wednesday, which is like right either on or after New Year's. I can't remember how the schedule works. And then one final week, and then I think the 15th is when we reconvene. So yeah, the 25th, which is Christmas Day, the New Year's Day, we will not meet. And then the following 8th, we will not meet. And we will meet on the 15th. We'll come back for that. I am unclear about, let me see here, Revelation at Refuge as well. Oof. What do we do about that? I may pause for 4 weeks. I hate to do that to you guys, but here's the deal. How many of you are going to the Fireside Theology Retreat? Anyone signed up for that just yet? 1 or 2 of you? Good. Still sign-ups available. It is on Planning Center or Church Center now. That's at the ranch. That is on, here's my dilemma, that's on the 17th, 18th, and 19th, which is right the Friday, Saturday, Sunday after that 15th that we would be coming back. I guess, no, I don't want to do that to myself. So we'll take off, we'll come back on the 22nd. So we'll take off on the 18th will be our last Wednesday of this month, and we'll have 4 weeks, and then we'll come back on the 22nd. Sorry to do that, but that's going to be really a lot to prepare for at the ranch. We are going to be doing like 4 or 5 sessions just like this one at the ranch, only exclusively through the book of Revelation. So if you have the means to go and want to be a part of that, it's going to be a tremendous time. It's our inaugural event. Fireside retreat event, and pretty much stoked about it. Very much looking forward to it. We're going to be covering nothing but eschatology. So if you have interest, check the Church Center app. There is still signups available, I believe. I will also be, I'll keep you posted on how my scheduling works out. I am going to push a little more aggressively. I'm just going to be straightforward with you. A little more aggressively to get through the New Testament than I have been. I've had zero urgency to get through because why? There's no need to. But there is need to now for me. My schedule is changing a little bit in the spring. I've taken an opportunity to be a teaching assistant to Dr. Malcolm Yarnell at Southwestern Seminary in systematic theology at the master's level. I've finished coursework in my PhD program and will be studying for comps and hopefully preparing for the prospectus for the dissertation as well in the late spring. But in conjunction with prepping for comprehensives, I was actually asking the registrar's office a couple weeks ago about getting the recordings for Dr. Yarnell and Dr. Bingham's systematic lectures to refresh myself for comprehensives. And then Malcolm asked me if I would be his teaching assistant for the spring, and that will mean I will absolutely get the lectures firsthand in person. And I'm going to take him up on that because I think that will help me prepare for comprehensives pretty substantially. What that will mean, though, is we're going to play it by ear and see. I have to limit to some degree my time. I am writing the Bible study each week for Sunday mornings, which if you're not in a Sunday morning Bible study, again, I would highly recommend you join one. There are verse-by-verse studies through whatever book we're in. We're in Exodus. We're actually just going to pick up in Exodus on January 12th. We're taking a break for December in Advent, but Advent studies are happening right now as well. But that's that's a sizable amount of undertaking to do those well, in addition to the preaching and then teaching assistant and a number of other senior pastoral responsibilities that I have. And so I want to try to protect my voice, my literal vocal cords, because they do get tired the more I use it, and my brain power as well. We'll see. I love the Bible and I love to teach it, and I always say I'm going to take a break, and then I never do. And so who knows? No promises. I'm kind of talking out loud right now, but that's the current plan. We're not going to cut it short, but we are going to try to move through the text a little bit quicker than perhaps we have been. So on that note, if there are no other announcements to be made, which there are, Christmas Eve, we have two services, 3:30 and 5. 3:30 and 5, correct? That is a Christmas Eve in the round. How many of you have never been to an in the round service before? Raise your hand. Okay, so a few of you in the back. They're very special services. We really, really love the in the round services. This will be the third one we've done. We're actually doing two this year, actually technically more than that, two on Christmas Eve. Again, 3:30 and 5, they're the same service both times. But we are also going to, for that following Sunday, the 29th, be in the round as well. And we'll have a kind of a special morning set up for that additionally. It won't be Christmas themed, but it will be probably still Christmas decorated because we won't have time to get all the decorations down. And it's fine, it's still December. But that will be a really fun one. So if you are planning on coming, come to either or. They're both going to be identical. We did a 3:30 this year. We offered two services because the last in the round we did on a, was that a Christmas Eve Sunday morning? We had like 800 something people here. So across three services. So two services. If we have 800, we'll be in trouble. We don't have that many seats, but I don't anticipate, because it's not a Sunday morning, as many people. Maybe I'll be proven wrong and there'll be people standing. What a cool Christmas Eve that would be. But that'll be happening. So just choose one, and then everything else is kind of normal after that. Any other things I'm missing, Kelsey? I don't think so. Of course, yeah. Next Tuesday, 6 days from now, women's Christmas party. Ladies, definitely sign up if you have not. Men, we need help. We need servers, and so if you are able and willing, that can be done on Church Center as well. Correct me if I'm wrong. Church Center, sign up for men serving. We'd love to have you for that. It's like serving plates, serving drinks, not cocktails. That sounded like drinks, like waters and teas. It's a church event. But there will be entertainment. It'll be in here. The whole room gets transformed. It's so much fun. You definitely want to come and be a part of that. We have a great time. It's one of my favorite events we do every year. Let's jump in. Colossians chapter 1. We start with arguably one of the most important passages for Christology that's in the New Testament. I mean, it certainly is a doozy. This is verses 15 through 20. He is the image, this is talking about Jesus, the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. So much to unpack here concerning the identity of Jesus Christ, both the 100% man and 100% God, the God-man, Jesus Christ, as it were. There are a number of details in here that are worth mentioning. So number one, notice in verse 15, he is the image of the invisible God. I've got a note there for you. This is the Greek term icon, from which we get our English word icon. We've just transliterated it right out of Greek and into English. This is the same term, by the way, that is used in the Greek Old Testament, the Septuagint, to talk about the image of God, that we are created in God's image. The icon of God. Christ is in every way the icon of the invisible God. To see Jesus Christ is to see that which cannot be seen but is, the invisible God. No one has seen God and lived, right? These are some of the passages that are put forth concerning the nature and identity of God. We are, in fact, I just wrote today the Bible study for January 12th for the chapter 19's, the first part of chapter 19, verses 1 through 15 of Exodus. And in Exodus 19, the people of Israel come out of Egypt. They go through Rephidim and into the wilderness at Sinai. And it's there that God tells Moses to tell the people to prepare themselves, to consecrate themselves, to wash themselves, to wash their garments, to abstain from sexual behavior, to, in other words, have a singular focus, which is preparation for an encounter with a holy God. And the seriousness with which God takes his holiness cannot be overstated, right? You cannot come into the presence of God and live unless he permits it. You cannot come into the presence of God in a non-consecrated form and live, because sin and uncleanliness cannot live in the presence of a holy and perfect God. These are all true things concerning the nature, the character of God, the power of God, the supremacy of God. And then you get God wrapped in human flesh, the frailty of humanity in the God-man Christ Jesus. He is the image, the thing that is seen, which represents that which is not seen. Which is why Jesus will say things, particularly in John's gospel, like, if you've seen me, you've seen what? My Father, right? You've seen the Father. If you have been with me, if you've heard me speak, if you've touched me, then you have been with God. You've heard God speak. You've touched God. You've been in the presence of God, because he is the image of God, the firstborn of all creation. Now, what does this mean? This is where some skeptics concerning the deity of Christ will come in and they go, well, God cannot be firstborn. God cannot be, it says again in verse 18 that he's the firstborn from the dead. And so that clearly means that Jesus can't be God because God can't be the firstborn from the dead. Well, what is he talking about in these passages? Firstborn from the dead, firstborn in all creation. This is referring to the one who lives after death, the one who is first resurrected. In other words, Christ, in his completed work on the cross in the empty tomb, sets forth a new office that he holds as the chief of the resurrected, the first of the resurrected. Christ lives in the flesh. He lives a full human life, beginning in infancy and as a toddler and as a child before becoming a man. In fact, there's some really great, I think very powerful theology in some of the works of the early church fathers, Gregory of Nazianzus being one of them, I believe, who talks about that Christ could not redeem that which he did not assume. I think this is really interesting early church thought. The early church, Irenaeus has some thoughts on this as well as not Justin, but what is the other one? I can't think of off the top of my head. Perhaps Origen, maybe. But they have this idea that Christ becomes an infant to redeem infancy. He becomes a toddler to redeem the toddler age. He becomes a child and an adult to redeem adulthood and childhood. He dies in the air to redeem the air, because Satan is the prince of the power of the air. He forges a new way through creation, through all that he experiences and touches, in bringing redemption to it, which is really, really a powerful thing to think about when you think about it. Christ is, as the firstborn of the dead, the chief among the resurrected, the prototype, as it were, the one that we look to, the model that we look to that models everything that comes after it, the blueprint for a resurrected life, a resurrected body. For those who push back against the deity of Christ in this passage, you're going to be very hard-pressed to explain verse 16. For by him all things were created. That's as plain as it gets. For by him all things were created. Everything was made not by, that means in Genesis 1:1, when it says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, that is not talking about God the Father, that is talking about God the Son. That's Paul's point here. That it is Jesus Christ who is the one who creates all things by the breath of his power. It says that in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. In other words, in the earthly realm, in the sky, the things that you can see, the things you cannot see, and anything that holds authority or power over you, whether that be a king, a dominion, a ruler, authority, something to that nature, all of it is subject to that which created it, which is Christ. These things were created through him, by him, and for him. He is the source of all creation. Creation moves through him, and creation moves to its end goal or its end recipient, which is him. Meaning that he makes everything for himself, for his own purposes, for his own glory, for his own benefit, for his own praise. We are not only the work of his hands, but the hands that bring praise to the power of his works. It's really an amazing picture that Paul paints here in just one verse. He is before all things. Nothing comes before him. He's what does he say in the book of Revelation? The Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the one who is, who was, and who is to come. Nothing existed prior to him, and nothing will outlast him or has the potential to outlast him. He is God over all things. Moreover, he is head of the body, the church. Body and church here in the Greek language, they're in apposition to one another, meaning that they kind of refer to the same thing. They're the same source. The body is the church. Christ is the head of the church in the same way that he is the head of a body. The head of the body is not the whole body. It's the head of the body. But it directs the rest of the body. Without the head, the body cannot live. The brain power, the thought, the direction, the vision, the will, agency, all of the things that make a human being uniquely human come by means of what goes on here. Christ holds this position as supreme, head over the church. That means when we worship God, when we pray, when we baptize, when we observe the supper, when we do anything worth doing in the church, we do to the praise of and the glory of Christ. Beyond that, it says that in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell. We cannot say the same thing about us. We can say that we are the temple of the Holy Spirit, no doubt about that. Paul makes that very clear, 1 Corinthians. We embody spiritual gifting. We embody the spiritual life. We cannot say the fullness of God dwells within us. That is not the case. That will never be the case. Only the fullness of God dwells within the Lord Jesus Christ because he is God. Through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. He is actively working in his redemptive actions to bring into reconciliation all things to himself. That's his goal. All things will not be reconciled to him in a redemptive manner. Some things will, what's the imagery he uses in the gospel? Will be as stubble that's burnt up in the refining fire. But that which he redeems will be like precious metal that does pass through the fire. Its impurities removed, and it being a more pure version of it after the fire than it was prior. That's us. Questions on this? There's a lot here, and I think the box is in the back, and so if you do have a question, Kelsey will promptly throw it at you. ¿Hay preguntas? Oh, see, that got Marcella. I knew. She would have to say yes, even if there wasn't. Hold on, we've got the box. You want to toss that to Marcella? Thank you.
I don't know if it's a proper question for this time, but everything was made for him and by him and returned to him. So when you say rulers, the Bible that I'm reading is principles and principados, like the evil part. And I know he made angels. The angels so is made by them. So he knew he made it also to be the fallen angels. Of course he made him, but
oh yeah. I mean, so bear this in mind. There are, when it comes to angels and demons, they come from the same factory, right? And there's not like, over there is where the angels are made, and over there is where the demons are made, and they kind of are at odds with one another. Demons are merely angels who defect, right? They're defectors. They are, so here's the interesting part about this, and we're actually going to do one other passage here in a minute that deals with the same, kind of in the same vein of this question a little bit. But, so you have within the like species, if you want to think of it that, of angels, the class of angels, or don't think of it in class because that's actually, so within the species of angels, you have different classes of angels. They're all angels, right? That's how the Bible at least presents it, but some of them are seraphim, some of them are cherubim, some of them are elemental spirits. Some of them are Nephilim, which the Nephilim are actually not angels. What is it? The Ophanim, yes, the eyes. You have the wheels, which the wheels are, it's unclear if that's talking about separate angelic beings or simply the throne of God with these crazy wheel-like objects that move the throne of God all over the earth so that God can see everything at one time. That's Ezekiel 1. You have a follow-up question there? Yeah.
So is there a hierarchy of these angels?
Yeah, so I mean, again, there is at least one for sure biblical class that is above the rest, which would be the archangel. And we only have one archangel that is explicitly named, and that is Michael the archangel. There is another one that's implied, Gabriel. There's another one that comes out of Jewish lore, or not really Jewish lore, kind of Jewish lore. You know, I actually don't know. Yeah, it is Jewish lore. Raphael. And then I think we've got one other one as well. I can never remember his name. Uzziah. Okay, yeah. I don't. My Jewish mysticism is not my strength. But these are Raphael and Uzziah are neither of them are even in the Bible. So I kind of count those as like, yeah, I don't know about that. That's not really real, you know. Michael for sure. Gabriel, very convincing. Never called an archangel, but the way he describes himself to Mary in Luke's account, everything that he says, and to Zechariah and Elizabeth for that matter, are the job of the archangel Michael. And so it seems like Gabriel and Michael are kind of doing the same thing. As far as like a distinction or a hierarchy between cherubim and seraphim, I don't know that I would say there is a hierarchy as much as there is just a difference in purpose, a difference in task, right? They seem to be different types of beings in terms of what they would maybe look like so for example, the cherubim are these wild-looking creatures with wings that cover what? Anyone remember? Their faces and their feet, and then two of them fly, right? So you get this, for example, in Isaiah. Let me flip over there, and I'll give you some. We're way off the reservation, but this is what I'm here for it. I love this kind of stuff. Let me mark. Yeah, okay, that's marked there. Okay, so you have right here, and this is not, sorry, I said cherubim, I meant seraphim. Isaiah 6, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, and with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is Yahweh of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. So that's one biblical class. Interestingly, seraphim is it's a Hebrew word that could be literally translated as a flying fiery serpent. So do with that what you will. Sounds like a dragon to me, just saying. Maybe Joe Rogan was right. If you know, you know. The chapter 1 of Ezekiel, you have this really wild description as well. As this is in verse 4. As I looked, behold, of chapter 1, a stormy wind came out of the north, and a great cloud with brightness around it, and fire flashing forth continually, and in the midst of the fire, as it were, gleaming metal. And from the midst of it came the likeness of 4 living creatures, and this was their appearance. They had a human likeness, but each had 4 faces, and each of them had 4 wings. Their legs were straight, and the soles of their feet were like the sole of a calf's foot, and they sparkled like burnished bronze. Under their wings, on their 4 sides, they had human hands, and the 4 had their faces and their wings thus. Their wings touched one another. I mean, it goes on. It's wild, right? You get in verse, let's see here, 15. Now as I looked at the living creatures, I saw a wheel on the earth, beside the living creatures, one for each of the 4 of them. As for the appearance of the wheels and their construction, their appearance was like the gleaming of beryl, and the 4 had the same likeness, their appearance and construction being, as it were, a wheel within a wheel. When they went in any of the 4 directions without turning as they went, and their rims were tall and awesome. Sounds like East Fort Worth rides, am I right? Whenever the Spirit wanted to go, they went, and the wheels rose along with them, for the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. We're not even really sure what's going on here with these living creatures, right? But they have a purpose. Their purpose is to be, whether they're operating or moving alongside the wheels. It goes on to describe the throne of God, which sits on, this is verse 26, above the expanse over their heads, there was a likeness of a throne, in appearance like sapphire, and seated above the likeness of a throne was a likeness with a human appearance. Likeness of a human appearance, interesting. And upward from what had the appearance of his waist, I saw, as it were, gleaming metal, so on and so forth. And the glory of the Lord, and I saw it, and I fell on my face, and I heard the voice of one speaking. So this is Ezekiel's vision of God moving about the earth in this sort of omnipresent, omniscient manner. So here's kind of the point that I'm making. The Bible never gives a description of which angels fall with Satan in the rebellion. So what that means to me is there's like one of a few possibilities. Either angels and also seraphim and cherubim and the on and on are different things. That is a possibility, I think. I don't recall, I would have to do a word study to find out, and maybe I'm wrong, and if I am, I'll stand corrected. But I can't think off the top of my head. I think when seraphim are described, they're not described as angels, they're described as seraphim. Yeah. So the assumption is that the seraphim and the cherubim, I think the cherubim are actually called angels now that I think about it. I'd have to go through and actually do some work. The point is this: when the angels fall in the rebellion, we're not told what class of angels fall. So it could be that it's all the same kind of angel, and therefore all demons are more or less the same, maybe with varying powers or strength, because it seems like some angels are stronger than others, right? It's also possible, I suppose, if it is true that seraphim, cherubim, and all the like are just classes of angels, that there could be several classes of demons as well, which would be altogether kind of terrifying. We do know there are also one other kind of spirit. I could put it that way. And I will talk about that in a moment, at a separate class that comes forth in the New Testament. Questions on that? So I don't remember so all that to say, Marcella, I think for your question, all things are made by him. And this, I think, actually makes the demonic rebellion all the worse. Because it is not merely that demons are in opposition to Jesus because they don't like him. It's that Jesus is in opposition to them because he created them and they rebelled against him. And that's a way more terrifying position to be in for them than for him and us. Yeah. This is a good question. Question? Any more? All right. Let's look at chapter 2, verse 8 through 10. We'll start actually in verse maybe 6. Therefore, as you received Christ Jesus the Lord, so walk in him, rooted and built up in him and established in the faith, just as you were taught, abounding in thanksgiving. That's the command. Be rooted in him and built up in him and established in the faith. Verse 8, see to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition. So that's the first class of philosophy and empty deceit. This would be any kind of worldly wisdom, any kind of worldly teaching that proceeds forth from human traditions, human, secular, if you want to think of it that way, although not called secular in this time, but a purely human, devoid of spiritual truth. But then notice the next phrase, and not according to the and according to the elemental spirits of the world, and not according to Christ. So this elemental spirits phrase is one that is very interesting, that really doesn't get a lot of attention in a lot of evangelical churches. I think probably more than anything because it's just a weird thing to think about. What do you think Paul means by this? What are elemental spirits? What could that possibly be referring to? It is the Greek term stoicheon, and it has the meaning of like an element of the universe. So when you think of elements, what do we think of? Yeah, Captain Planet, right? Earth, wind, water, fire, maybe some good music as well. These are elements of the world. And so there is, when you study the history of this, especially in again, a little bit of a Jewish context, certainly also in a Greco-Roman context as well, there is a historied belief that, and you see it still in some pagan religions today, that there are particular deities over particular elements. So, for example, Poseidon is one of such elemental spirit. The god of the ocean, right? Zeus, the lord of the sky, the king over all of the Greek god, pantheon of gods. You have in certain indigenous tribes gods of the forest, gods of the jungle, gods of the river. We saw that in Exodus, in our study in Exodus. In fact, I made the case in one of our studies, one of my favorite studies we did in Exodus, where after the plagues, we talked about what the various plagues represented in terms of judgments on false gods. So when the Nile is full of blood, the Nile in and of itself was it was worshipped. It was an elemental spirit that had some kind of power to have women conceive and give birth. It was it was connected to fertility. And so when Moses dips his staff in it and blood appears, it's almost as if Moses has killed this false god. There's a kind of brutalism to this plague that we often miss in the Western world. When the frogs die, when they come up out of the Nile and then they're also dead everywhere and it's awful and the land stinks, there is a frog-headed god of Egypt, goddess, that is connected to magic, to sorcery. And when this particular plague strikes, it's curious that from that point forth, the court magicians have no power. It's almost as if Yahweh has killed this false god, this demon pretending to be a god, thus rendering them powerless. This is I think, a well-established belief among many people all around the world, even today. There are elemental types of spirits that people see as potentially supernatural and powerful, and therefore they have worshipped them. And I think what Paul's point here, and I think we need to heed this well, is that these elemental spirits are not fake. You have got to wrap your mind around that. You see this a lot in parts of Louisiana, where voodoo is very prominent. You see it in, was there a voodoo comment over there just now? Oh, you know that guy, yeah. Yeah, of course. There's a lot of this. And I think the 21st century modern Christian reaction response is they're worshiping a false god that's a figment of their imagination. It's not real. They need to believe in the real God. There's a reason why God in the Bible refers to himself not as the one real God, but the one true God. It supposes that there are other non-true gods. When Baal and when the various other ancient Near Eastern Semitic and non-Semitic false gods are worshipped, they are treated as real beings with actual real working power. They just don't have the authority of God. They are false gods. They are pretenders who have deceived people into believing that they are such when they are really not. And Paul's point here in verse 8 is important. They are deceitful. They contrive and take captive people with philosophies and empty deceit, which is why Paul is warning you not to be taken captive by it. He would not be telling you don't be taken captive by philosophies and empty deceits of elemental spirits if there were no real threat of such a thing. The point is that they are real and have the ability to deceive. You have a question here? Throw the box this way. Right here. You can do it, Marcelo. We believe in you. You're not even on camera, so if it's a fail, look. Oh, what an amazing... Actually, that was a really good throw.
I fumbled it.
It was Ben that was the... Yeah. Question.
So, would it be fair? Would it be fair to say that the elemental spirit is like kind of the underlying power that, like, maybe these false gods that have some power but not all power are like the fundamental building blocks for the worldly views and traditions that other cultures kind of follow and have?
I think so.
Is that...
I think so, and I think this is an important distinction because I think, again, the evangelical mindset towards other false religions are that they're just these sort of man-made, made-up, fairy tale nonsense, and we shouldn't believe in that because it's all comes from men. I don't think that's true at all. I think some of them certainly are from men, but I think they come from elemental spirits also. I think that when people... so you have to understand that there's a reason why, like in Genesis, for example, there's a reason why in Genesis 11 you get the story of Babel. Babel is such an important story to understanding how the world works today and why we are where we are. When you think of, there's this question that comes up a lot of the times where, we've talked before about how unreached people groups, tribes that have never heard the gospel, when I say things like, if someone in an unreached people group dies, they go to hell. They don't have like special grace because they never got a chance to hear the gospel. That irks people to some degree, sometimes. Because it's not fair. But Genesis 11 answers why actually it's perfectly just. Because God didn't plant them in some island around the world where no one knew anything that was happening or whatever. Right? We began in one area. We began in one place. We were divided and dispersed because of our sin, because of the sin of pride, which sought to put ourselves in a place where God would find us worthy or impressive, right? And so he confuses the languages and separates the people. And when you read the account of Babel, it's a very strange place where you find it, because you have this genealogy, and then right in the middle of one genealogy and another genealogy is Babel. And it's a strange placement until you realize what Moses is doing. He's giving you the origin story for how in the world Israel became at such odds with people like the Canaanites or the Philistines. How did this happen? And the point of Genesis 11 is actually the Canaanites are your long-lost cousins and your family. You all belong to the same family, the Noahic family, which extends down from a genealogy going all the way back to Adam, right? But they disperse, and they go into different areas, and they establish their own traditions and their own faiths. They move away from the one true God on purpose, and they are thus taken captive by elemental spirits that lead them astray into believing an entirely different thing. When I look at historical writings from Asian cultures, from African cultures, from Indian cultures, and I see depictions of godlike figures that look like dragons or that look like animals with different kind of faces or wings or fire or come out of the river or the trees, I take that seriously. I don't think that that's like the ancient Disney creating magical fun stories for children. I think that those were real beings that deceived people, just in the same way that a serpent deceived Eve in the beginning. They're elemental spirits. Now here's where it gets really, if you want to go down the rabbit hole, and I've probably plugged this before. I will plug it again because I think it's worth listening to if you're into this kind of thing. There's a podcast called Haunted Cosmos that is really, really fascinating. These guys are Presbyterians. Their theology's, a little different on certain things, but they really don't ever talk about the things that we differ on, because the whole point of the podcast has really nothing to do with any of that. Their whole goal in that podcast is to look at the strange and unexplainable things in the world and try to reframe it within a biblical perspective and not just write it off as that couldn't be true because science doesn't give us an answer for that. So for example, think of a potential or a particular figure attached to water that has reached near godlike status, in that people travel from all over the world to this one location in hopes of seeing her. The Loch Ness Monster. Yeah. Think of another creature of mystical value, legend, near godlike status that is perhaps more attached to the mountains and the woods. Bigfoot. And think about other Bigfoot-like creatures that seem to be of the same build, but perhaps in different climates. Boggy Creek has one. You have what is it? Yeah? Where, over here? What is it? The abominable snow. Yeah, so I was going to say there's one attached to snow, but they all kind of are described the same way. So what Haunted Cosmos will do in their episodes is they'll look at this kind of stuff and just go like, look, there's too much evidence for some of these things. Like Bigfoot, for example. It's not like one or two debunked photos that are clearly fake. Like there's hundreds of stories, of accounts, of photos. If you listen to the Bigfoot episode, I think it's a 2-part episode. They do the infamous recording, the sound recording. Can't think of the guy's name, but he brought his recording stuff out, and it's terrifying actually to listen to it. But their whole point is this: like, couldn't it be actually that like this is an elemental spirit of some kind? And his point, they asked this question, and I think there's something to this. Like, we don't really know a lot about what elemental spirits are. We know they can be deceitful. It's also potentially true that they're neutral, that they're not not evil. In the same way that some angels are bad, but not all angels are bad. Some of them are actually good. Some of them are just sort of doing what God asks them to do. It could be that some of these elemental spirits they exist and they're not good or bad. Some of them certainly are bad and potentially deceitful. But it's a very interesting podcast. It's very speculative, but it is. The reason I like it is this: you've been brought up in a world of materialism, and what I mean by that is, if it is not material, if you can't touch it, see it, interact with it in a tangible manner, it can't be real. It cannot. If science can't explain it in meaningful detail that is removed from any kind of spiritual realm, then it can't be real. It can't possibly. So Bigfoot can't be real. Loch Ness can't be real. Dragons can't be real. These things cannot exist because we have no way to quantify them with empirical science. And our whole conviction as Christians is that there is more to the world than what you can see. That's Paul's point in chapter 1, visible and invisible. There are things in the world you cannot see, or things that you can see and then in an instant you can't. I find this interesting that for the people who have come in contact with some of these creature-like things, in almost every story it seems like, when they try to track them or find them, it's as if they disappear almost immediately and they cannot find them anymore. And it's like, how is that possible? How does that happen? Well, it happens all the time in the Bible with various angelic beings who are there in one moment and gone the next. And so I would challenge you to get outside of modernity, get outside of the material worldview that has been programmed into your mind, and look at the world as an ancient, as a pre-modern, and assume that what Paul is saying is true. That there are elemental spirits who can take captive and deceive and can lead astray if possible. And so you must avoid those things. Yeah. Questions on that? So this is the one that I plugged in. I forgot about this passage. I was like, we got to cover elemental spirits. This is too cool.
So aliens would fall in that category.
It absolutely would. So this is the big, man, I'm starting to sound like a, I won't use the term. This is like the play, right? And the Honda Cosmos, they have an episode on this. They talk a little bit about this. But it's like, there is enough evidence that there's something. I mean, the Pentagon has released information about this. There's been congressional hearings about this stuff. This is the remarkably shocking part about the year 2020. I remember when the first congressional hearing happened about UFOs. And I remember it was like, it's like, the world has been through the ringer. When news drops about UFOs being real and people are just like, I don't have time for that right now. I can't do that right now. Like, what a wild amount of trauma we went through for a few years there. But this is the play, I think, and some of the stories, if you've heard some of these people that talk about, there's one guy, I can't think of his name, he was a part of these congressional hearings, who talked about how they felt like they could summon them, and it's like they think inwardly and have this like spiritual, what is it? Yeah, Greer. Yeah, and there's like almost like a spiritual communing that takes place that calls them. I'm like, bro, that doesn't sound like an advanced species. That sounds like a spiritual being. Yeah, well, and so that's my point, is I think that aliens are real. I just think they're demons. And, you get called kind of crazy saying that kind of thing 5 or 10 years ago. I think today we're kind of like, yeah, I mean, I'll believe anything now, right? And throw the box this way. Hold on, we got to get the box. You and then James right after you. Oh,
like you say that all these can be deceiving people, and
Yeah.
you say avoid them. So what do you say to the tons of Christians who see this as a fun and not real.
Say that one more time.
Yes, like you'd say that all these things can be deceiving, avoiding them, But what do you say to those people that are think that it's fun, that is not real, that it's only fantasy, and,
Yeah.
and we're Christians?
Yeah, I think that's part of the deception of all of this, right? Is that if the devil can get you to believe he doesn't exist, then he can kind of do whatever he wants. Now, most Christians, at least Bible-believing Christians, don't have a problem with acknowledging that there's a Bible or a Satan figure, a devil figure. They don't even have a problem with accepting that Satan has some kind of demonic host that he commands. But then it's like there's no real attention paid to the fact that if that is real, there should be real impact on the world. And yet when things happen, most Christians will try to explain these things away with modern materialist reasoning. So for example, people who, and I think people who are active users of drugs are more susceptible to this. But there's a difference between someone being high and someone being like in a state of like rage, like there's a term, I can't think of it off the top of my head right now, some of you may know, but I have seen certain people on drugs in my life and just thought like they're baked, they need to sober up and go to rehab. I've seen other people where I'm like, they're possessed, and drugs are like the smallest part of the problem in this whole situation, right? We don't talk a lot about demon possession or demonization in the church today. It's as if like the world became modern and science, started explaining problems away, and now all of a sudden demons aren't really all that interested in doing their work. They're just as active today as they were 2,000 years ago. Now they're limited. One thing I always want to remind you of is that only God is omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent. So Satan can't hear your thoughts. He can hear you speak. He can't hear your thoughts. He can't get inside your brain. If you're a believer, you've been sealed with the Holy Spirit. He can demonize you by attacking you in various ways. There's subtle. Satan is a brilliant schemer. He's very good at what he does, but he's not God, and he can't be in all places at once. So I always like to remind our church members, when they're going through something, was it Satan that was doing this to me? And I always like to remind us that we're probably not important enough for Satan. And I mean that in the kindest of ways. I include myself in that. If Satan has limited resources and limited time and can only be at one place at one time, I doubt very seriously he's messing with a, middle-class church member in Texas. Even an upper-class church member in Texas. Like, he's going for world leaders. He's going for people who have the nuclear codes, right? People who have the ability to really do some damage. Now, could lower class demons come after you? Certainly. Yeah. Sometimes it's not demons, sometimes it's just your stupid choices you made. I think I need to say that as your pastor too. Sometimes we give credit to demonic forces and it was like, no, you just were sinful. You just made a dumb choice and you're reaping the consequences of that now. But I believe in spiritual warfare, and I believe that it's real. I believe that the church has been deceived by materialist, secular thought that that's not really how the enemy works anymore. And I wholeheartedly reject that. And, so yeah, aliens aren't real. Maybe they're not. Sure is a lot of evidence of it. Sure are a lot of people in Congress who seem to be thinking that they are. So it's like, what are they then? If they are real, what are they? They're not an advanced species that lives light years away from us. If they are, their knees will bow to Jesus as well, regardless. But it's more likely that they are beings who are very familiar with this world, because they're demons. Question for James right next to you.
Going back to you.
Thank you. So just talking about, like, even during World War II, there were anti-gravity aircraft
Right.
that the Germans created, but our soldiers called them Foo Fighters because they didn't know what to call them.
Yeah.
So that's where the band got its name from.
Right.
But Hitler had a group of dedicated soldiers that scoured the world looking for supernatural objects,
Oh yeah.
and they were even in contact with demonic spirits.
Yeah.
That's how they did it, because they had the most advanced technology of anybody on the face of the planet.
Sure.
But that's where our NASA scientists and all those things came from. But I mean, you were talking about things disappearing. You think about Peter with the Ethiopian eunuch. He was there 1 second, then he was in Jerusalem. I mean, so those are things we kind of overlook. And you know, God is one that's all powerful, but of course we have an enemy that's going to copy
Yeah.
a lot of the things. They didn't lose those abilities. So, you know, a lot of people just, I don't know, have a hard time dealing with, especially in the church, dealing with supernatural subject matter, because, I mean, you don't really have a good explanation for it. But, you know, I've experienced a few things because just doing research, a lot of my family members in the past were into like voodoo and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so I've experienced some weird things, and I'm like, okay, what's going on? And so, but just looking at it from a spiritual viewpoint, you know, it says the sins of the fathers can affect for generations.
Oh yeah.
And so, you know, with people who do that, you know, the bad side has access due to generational curses. I mean, stuff we don't talk about a lot. You know.
It's true, but there is a curse breaker,
Exactly.
and we don't have to pass these curses along.
Exactly.
My
But like,
par-
a lot of people aren't aware of those things that could
Right.
be generational. And I'll be quiet here, but just talking about how the enemy operates, you know, there are people who pay $10,000, they go to Peru, and they use ayahuasca to
Oh, yeah.
get in contact with demonic spirits. I mean,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
a big thing.
I think
It's all the rage
ayahuasca
in Hollywood.
is very connected to
It is,
demons.
absolutely.
The stuff I've read and heard about that, I'm like,
Yes, sir.
no.
Yeah.
People that take it and come back and like within 6 months have like left their families and divorced it's like, you cannot tell me that there's not something demonic about this.
Paying $10,000
Yeah.
to do that.
Yeah. You have a question?
Yeah, interesting
Yeah.
subject. I've had this question in different forms for many years. So you talk a little bit about Satan and him not being omnipotent or
Yeah.
omnipresent, can't read your thoughts, all that kind of stuff. But he does have, there are demons out there. He has legions of demons, obviously. When you say when they're tempting you, like, for example, the Screw Tape Letters, or some of Frank Peretti's novels,
Yeah.
where he illustrates that. What are your thoughts on, like, the actual mechanism that occurs when that happens? Are these demons able to put thoughts into your mind?
No, but I will say this.
If not, then how do they go about tempting you?
Yeah. So have you ever found yourself all of a sudden interested in a particular restaurant or product online or some kind of new gadget or the power of suggestion in marketing alone, the evidence of the brain science behind marketing schemes and power of suggestion is very, very, I think, understated in our culture today. There's a reason why people, by and large, go to the same products, move to the same things, and it's not because McDonald's wins, not because it's good, right? Although those little cheeseburgers, meat and cheese only, those things kill, man. Especially late at night with that Coke. The Coke is better at McDonald's. There's been a study done on that. But it's not like objectively better than any of the others. But they know how to market their brand. The power of persuasion is very high. There are online, and this is how like what are they called? Not magicians, but I'm having a hard time thinking. Yeah, illusionists, or there's another name for it as well. But this is how they do a lot of their tricks, right? Well, they'll have you like pick this and then do this and then say this and then pick between these numbers, and like every time they guess what you're doing. A mentalist, yeah. How do they do that? Well, they have a system. They're not reading your mind. They're not able to do all that. We're just dumb. And we don't know what's happening to us when it's happening to us. So, I mean, if people who are not demons can do that fairly well, then I think it stands to reason that demons probably can do it better. So while I don't think that they can plant thoughts in your mind, I think that they, through the power of suggestion, can get you looking in the right direction at the right time to see what they want you to see. And you're not even really aware of it. Or to get you upset about something more than perhaps what it deserves, to compromise your mental state. And the thing about demons, I think, more than anything else, and I think this is what makes Screwtape Letters so compelling, is there's not really a goal of demons except to keep you away from that which is holy. So it really doesn't matter if you look left or right, just stop looking straight. That's the goal. I don't care if you choose that way or that way, just stop moving that way, right? And if I can draw you off center, then I've won. So I think that's how, I mean, again, the Bible doesn't really give clear methodology to it, but, you know, when I think about the ways in which we are deceived into doing things that we weren't even really aware of that we were being deceived by, if people can do that kind of thing, I can only imagine how well-tuned demons are to it. Did you have another question as well?
Satan tempted Jesus.
Yeah.
Lust of the eyes, lust
Yeah.
of the flesh, pride of life.
Yeah.
I mean, it's something that's obviously still working. So,
Yeah.
I mean,
No doubt.
and if he went after Jesus like that, you know, we're nothing close.
So here's the interesting part about Yahweh. Having had this discussion about elemental spirits that seem to be attached to particular elements, there is a reason why in the Psalms and in the major prophets and even in the life of Christ, you see God over all of the elements. Christ walks on the water, but he's not just Lord of the water. He's Lord of the land. He's Lord of the sky. God is the God of fire, of all of it. Which is why, this is why Yahweh continuously makes this claim that I am the King of kings, I am the God of gods. There is none other than me. This one over here manipulates the earth. I'm the creator of the earth. This one over here moves the water. I'm the creator of the water. I have dominion over the earth and the water and the sky. I'm the maker. Christ is the maker of those things. Those elemental spirits tremble before him. And this is why I think when you read the Gospels, there is this incredible surge of demonic activity that takes place. When you read the Old Testament and all the way up through Malachi, you get Satan and demons like 3 times. 4 times. And when he appears, it's not even like he seems more like a schemester or like a trickster than he does like the anti-God, right? And then you get to the New Testament and it's like all of a sudden there are demons everywhere. And they're possessing people, and you got the oh my gosh, why can I not think of his name? The Gadarene, there's another name. The Gadarene is not, what is it? Yeah, the demoniac. Gadarene, the Gerasene. Oh, I'm clearly tired tonight. I'm having a hard time recalling words. Yeah, the Gerasene demoniac. You have in Acts the sons of Sceva. They're all over the place. And in the multiple healings in Mark's gospel, where it's like a deaf spirit or a mute spirit or a spirit that causes a person to be bent over. This is not because Mark is not a child of modernity and has not been, found in the salvation of science to explain that actually muteness and deafness are medical conditions that can be healed with these various, or explained with these various, no, these are demons. Now, that's not to say that there's not also anatomic breakdown in our human bodies that cause muteness and deafness and so on. That does happen. We live in fallen bodies, broken bodies. They are in decay. They will die. The hope is not that we won't die. The hope is that we'll live again through resurrection, and death will be no more. But there are also spirits that cause physical effects that Jesus has lordship over. And so it's a fascinating thing that when we read the New Testament, it's like the moment Christ comes onto the scene, demons show up in full force. Why? Revelation 12 tells us why. Because the dragon sought to devour the child, but he was caught up with God at his right hand, and so now he seeks to devour the woman and her offspring, us, the church. It sets in motion this strange satanic war, which is why Christ tells us, all authority has been given unto me. The kingdom of God is here. Go and charge the gates of hell and have dominion. My preaching through Mark, preaching through verse by verse through Mark has changed greatly my view of Satan's role in the world. I used to take the view that he's the God of this world, he's the prince of the power of the air, therefore he has this like grand authority on the earth to do whatever he wants to do until Christ returns. I do not believe that is true. I don't believe that's what Paul's teaching at all. I think when he says the God of this world, he's saying it in a kind of mocking tone. He's the God of this world. No, he's not. There is only one God. Satan can no longer deceive the nations. He's here, he'll deceive, which is why Paul and Peter both say routinely, he will deceive the non-believers, but the elect belong to God. God will take who belongs to him, and Satan can do nothing about it. He cannot do anything about it. He will attempt to. He will attempt to kill, steal, and destroy, but he has no real power. The power comes from Yahweh, and he has given it to the church to make disciples. Authority has come to the church to make disciples of all the nations. The nations will no longer be bound by him. Yeah. We have a question in the back from a strange bald man.
Hi, love the show, long-time listener. Just thinking about this subject, I grew up very Baptist,
Yeah.
extremely, and anytime that false gods were brought up and taught about, it was almost more from the angle of, false being like a fake god or not.
Idol.
Yeah, an idol or not real God. And so I think what I'm hearing you saying is it's probably not profitable to think of false gods in that way.
No.
Necessarily. And secondly, my other question would be, why do you think, evangelical traditions, Baptist, Methodist, have that bent, and what's the right path out of that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think we have that bent because we are victims of modernity in a way we're not willing to admit. I think we've drank the Kool-Aid of modernity in ways that we are unaware. And so, listen, I'm not a anti-science type of person. I think science has a tremendous place in society. I think science, in some ways, especially astrophysics, has given us a lens to view that which has previously been invisible and has now become visible, that which is created by Christ. That the complexity of God's creation is far grander today than it was 2,000 years ago because of what we can see. I think that's tremendous. The universe bends to his will. When you understand how big the universe actually is, you realize God is massive, right? So I think science has a place. Medicine has a place. I'm not a crazy, I think that there is a place for, I vaccinated my kids, not with the COVID vax, but with the other vaccines. I respect people's agency and will to decide whether they take medicine or don't take medicine. I think that's a kind of a fundamental human right, right? A government certainly should not encroach upon. But with that being said, it doesn't answer every question. And the position that many evangelicals have put themselves into is actually what we've said is like, we believe in the Bible, but science has shown us things that we now need to make the Bible line up with. So science says that the world is, 70 trillion years old or whatever it is. So that must mean that in Genesis, when it talks about the 6 days of creation, these must be like eons or like, figurative days that really mean like billions of years. And when God creates the earth and the crawling creatures and the vegetation and the birds of the air and the fish of the sea, he must have done it by means of evolution, of macroevolution, right? That is foisting upon the Bible something that the Bible is not conveying. And essentially what it's saying is, science is my chief objective or chief priority, and I need to make the Bible agree with it. Rather than saying, the Bible is my chief objective, chief priority, and everything else falls subservient to it. Therefore, if science comes back and says 70 trillion years old, we go, try again. You got your calculations wrong. Which, by the way, the numbers change all the time, right? So this is, it's a fundamental reordering of priority. I think the reason why we don't believe in demons and elemental spirits and false gods is because we do not hold a supreme position for Scripture. Because we read the Scripture through the lenses of modernity and say, well, Mark couldn't understand that deafness is actually not a demonic thing, it's a medical condition. And if only he had a doctor from the 20th century, then there would have been no need for exorcisms. There would have just been surgeries, and science would save the day, right? We reject that outright. We reject that outright. In the same way that I would say that this has infected our view of false gods as well. So is there a way out? Yeah, I think it's reclaiming an ancient, pre-modern view of scriptures. This is why I am so interested in early church history, because it's reading devout followers of Jesus who are not modern thinkers. They view the world very differently than we do. They view the world through very different lenses than we do. They have no problem with acknowledging that there are things out there that we cannot see that can deceive. When in the Latter-day Saint tradition, the claim is that the angel Moroni shows Joseph Smith a vision. I believe that 100%. I have no problem believing that. You know what Joseph Smith's favorite Bible verse was? Anyone want to guess? I'm going to read it to you. Favorite Bible verse. Talked about it all the time. In fact, largely dependent on it for the Latter-day Saint movement. Let's see here. It is right here. James chapter 1, verse 5. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. Joseph Smith wanted wisdom. He asked God for wisdom, and this was the response he got. The angel Moroni showed up, and he thought, well, this must be from God, because God gives wisdom, and I've asked for it. I have no problem believing that an actual angelic being appeared to him with another gospel. I think it was a fallen angel, But I have no problem believing that. I have no problem believing Charles Taze Russell, founder of the Jehovah's Witnesses, who had visions and dreams of the things that he was shown that led to the birth of Jehovah's Witnesses, were real. I have no problem accepting that Victor Paul Wierwille, founder of the Way International, received by prophetic vision the direction that eventually creates the cult known as the Way. I have no problem with these things at all. And I think Christians would do well to accept that. They didn't make them up. They were led astray. They were held captive. The only one that may have made it up, let's just be honest, is L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology. He was literally a science fiction writer. That people missed that detail. Like, bro, he wrote science fiction books. And then he was like, maybe this could be a religion. And people were like, okay. I don't understand that. I have no patience for that. Did you have a question over here? Yeah. 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 Right. Exactly. Amen. When Satan comes into the gathering, the heavenly gathering in Job 1, this is another that Old Testament scholars will look at and say, like, this is the council of El, the council of the divine, where other lower gods come to, and by gods we mean angelic beings of power, beings perceived as gods, but are to not be worshipped because they are not God. But they are real. And boy, that freaks people out. So if you want my take on Haunted Cosmos in terms of where to start, Mothman, super good. That's season 1. Whole episode on that. Highly recommend that one. If you're familiar with the Mothman story, they do a lot of history in that, and it's pretty terrifying. The High Strangeness at the Sea, I think that's the very first episode they did, is pretty good as well. They make some statements, they make some points in that podcast that really kind of blow me away when I think about it. But they have done stuff on a number of topics. The Bigfoot episodes are really, really compelling. They have one on MK Ultra this past season that is really wild. Evangelistic Aliens, I think, is the one that is the last of season 1. Talk about aliens. There's some good ones on there, and they make a good point, which is don't write off, in the same way we've written off these fake gods, don't write off these things of which there are mounds of evidence. In that High Strangeness, there's a number of sea logs from ship captains from the 17th and 18th centuries of things that they see on the ocean that are unexplainable. And it's anyway, give the podcast a listen if you are interested in that. It is really, really wild. We'll come back next week. We may jump ahead. I think for chapter 4 of Colossians, let me just do this real quickly so that I can say we did it. Verses 10 and 14, I put these in here just because I think if anything it's kind of interesting. Verse 10, Aristarchus, my fellow prisoner, greets you, and Mark, the cousin of Barnabas, concerning whom you received instructions. If he comes to you, welcome him. That is none other than Mark, the author of Mark's Gospel, which we've been studying for 14 months now. If you look at verse 14, Luke, the beloved physician, greets you, as does Demas. This is the writer of Luke. And I bring those up because I think they're important details to remind you that the Bible is not just a collection of unconnected books, that they all, beyond having the same ultimate author and the Holy Spirit, are authored in the New Testament especially during a time where many of these people were in contact with one another. You get that in the Old Testament as well. Isaiah and Jeremiah and some of the Isaiah and some of the minor prophets. Isaiah, Jeremiah, and some of the minor prophets exist during the same time frame and actually reference one another, which is kind of wild. But the New Testament certainly is much more compact, being that it's in such a small window of time. And so I think it's cool to find Luke and Mark in Colossians. You wouldn't expect to find them there. So we'll come back next time, and we'll actually go ahead and just continue on with the next book of our study, which is going to be 1 Thessalonians. I think. We didn't do Thessalonians, did we? I'll do my notes and I'll check. I don't remember. I don't think we did, because I think I would have remembered Man of Lawlessness. So 1 and 2 Thessalonians next week. We will see you then. God bless you. Thanks for being here.